With all the leaves falling off the trees, I thought, let's make an autumnal card where I use the leaves for stamping. I thought this is going to be an utter messy disaster, and I must say I was pleasantly surprised, especially how the second card turned out, because that was just an experiment. I picked quite a lot of leaves. I went for a walk in the forest and picked way too many, and I will give you a few tips for the leaves later in the video. For the stamping, I will be using acrylic paints. My ones are nothing special. You really don't need anything fancy for this. As long as you have few colors or just white if you want to do the second card. So I will start with my first card with the typical stamping with leaves, which you might remember when you were a child. I actually do not remember ever doing this as a kid. Stamping with a potato is something I remember. First, I painted the background. I mixed dark green, I also added some blue and black, and I managed to mix the exact color I had in my head, this dark green color. I was playing with the idea to paint the background in the color of magenta, just to match the second card, but mixing colors is not easy, at least for me, and I could not get the right shade, so green it is. I let the background fully dry, I left it taped on the board as it is, and once it was dry, I started stamping the leaves. I will be stamping 3 layers of leaves, each different type and color. For the first layer, I was going to use 4 different leaves, but I only used 2 and reapplied the paint. You can use only 1 leaf, there is no problem reusing the leaves. And I mix this peachy color. I used the paint beige or flesh, I think it's called, and white. I wanted to create pastel colors. With my brush, I spread the paint across the leaf. I don't really use acrylic paints too often, so I'm not really an expert, but I like to use a damp brush when applying acrylic paints. The application is much easier and smoother. I used a laminated cardstock to apply the paint on top of the leaf. You can use a scrap paper or newspaper, which might be better because you don't need to clean it, as the paint does dry pretty quickly. I also used a tool to hold the leaf in place when I was applying the paint, just to get a good application. And then I flipped the leaf and placed it onto the panel. The cardstock is the Canson XL mixed media, but you can also use watercolor cardstock, which I will be using for the second card. To get a good impression, you want to press the leaf a little bit. You can use your fingers. I used also this brush that has stiffer bristles. I actually wanted to use a makeup sponge, but I didn't have one at that time. And I repeated this process 4 times for each leaf. After I finished stamping this layer, I was going to leave it as it is. That was my original plan, but as I was looking at it, it looked a little bit bare or unfinished. I thought it needed some additional layers. If I have used smaller leaves for the first layer, I would have used the same ones, but with the bigger leaves, I didn't think it would look good. So I used this leaf. I'm not sure what the name of the plant is. I made my paint a little bit darker compared to the first layer. I used the same beige, but I added a little bit of red. And I applied the paint across the leaf, and then I pressed the leaf onto the cardstock. I did not get a good impression. Depending on the leaf, you can restamp, but with this leaf type, not really. It doesn't look that bad, but I used my brush, dipped it in the paint, and I painted the missing leaves, which corrected my imperfect stamping. For the last layer, I did not press the record button, so I don't have any footage. You can see the end result at the end of this video. I did pretty much the same. This time I mixed together green and white to create pastel green. I used smaller leaves and I stamped them where I thought there was too much of an empty space. So moving on to my experiment card, my idea was to use white acrylic paint for the stamping to create a sort of a faux heat embossed look, and then for the coloring I used the watercolors. I have here a few leaves. These ones are actually from our garden. The stamping is the same. I apply the paint over the leaf and then I press the leaf on top of the cardstock. And I repeated this process with each leaf. Here you can see it in a close-up. It does create a sort of a heat embossed look. I will skip the stamping with the rest of the leaves as I'm doing the same thing. And let's start with the watercoloring. Before painting the leaves, I wanted to add a little bit of color to the background. This is completely optional, you can skip it and have a white background. I did the wet on wet technique and I only applied the water and then the paint around the leaves, just to add a subtle color to the background. I picked this green paint and what a mistake. This is supposed to be an autumnal card and this green is just too bright for it. I should have used the green I used for the card with the fir trees that I made a few weeks back, but I wanted to use something different and this is the result. I thought I will have to redo it, but luckily I was able to save it, which you will see later in the video. But first I painted the leaves. I have here 4 paints, orange, orange brown, red and magenta. I did the wet on wet technique again and I played with the colors. I applied them randomly, mixed them up, just following the shape of the leaf. By the way, if you have any questions, if there's something unclear how I painted this, just ask in the comments. I will show you the whole coloring and while I'm painting, let me give you a few tips for the leaves. First of all, I would recommend picking leaves from the trees that are close by, because if you are missing a few, you can just pop out and collect more. I actually did that when I was stamping on this card, as I was missing smaller leaves. I would also recommend picking them on the day when you are crafting. If you do not manage, put them into a book because they might curl up and get dry. For this card, I used fresh leaves, but I also made a card where I used gouache and I used a leaf that was drying, pressed in a book for a few days. I saw in a video where the person was soaking the leaf in a hot water. I tried that and it worked, but I did not try what happens when you use a leaf when it's dry. And when I say a dry leaf, I mean pressed in a book for 1 or 2 weeks, not these super dry leaves. I might be making one more card with stamped leaves next week and I will try that, so make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss it. And that's all about the leaves. So I finished painting the leaves. The colors I picked look amazing, but the background not so much. I thought let's add some splatter. Splatter can sometimes change the look a bit, but not this time. As you can see, the green just doesn't fit. In the video, it doesn't look that bad, but in reality, the green was too bright. It did not feel autumnal. However, before tossing it to the bin and starting new, I thought let's use a clean damp brush and reactivate the splatter. It cannot get worse. As the background still needed to be light, I only used the color from the splatter. I didn't need to add any additional color. And I love the result. As I went with my damp brush over it, the colors of the splatter mixed with the green and created this muddy pink look, which is perfect for autumnal cards. If I were to redo it, I would use a different shade of green, add some brown, and maybe add some of the magenta, or do a messy watercoloring and make the colors around the leaves slightly lighter. Lastly, to finish up the painting, I added a new splatter and then I let it dry. To assemble the cards, I adhered the panels on top of a card base using simple double-sided tape, and the greeting says heartfelt thanks and it's heat embossed in white on a black cardstock. I adhered it at the bottom right of the card using a foam tape. So the cards are finished. I absolutely love the results. Here you can see the first card with the last layer of the stamped leaves, which I stamped in green. As you can see, acrylic paints are shiny when they are dry. And here is the second card. I am so happy I was able to save it. I love the look of the white acrylic paint. Yes, you can use stamps for this and heat emboss it, but using real leaves, it gives you this organic look which you cannot achieve with stamps. So that is all for today. Thank you all so much for watching and I will see you in my next video.